Thank you for being here. I'm Bruce Landsberg, Vice Chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. I'm joined today by our investigator in charge and senior air safety investigator, Dr. Jennifer Rohde, our fire chief, Robert Benoit, Chief Toby, and Mayor President-elect Josh Aguilar. So they will if they have any additional comments, we'll get to those at the end. So we're going to go through an update, some of the things that we covered yesterday. We've got a few more things for you. And again, let me stress, we are in the preliminary stages of the investigation. So we have some drone footage here that was taken by NTSB drone, which shows the debris field of the accident. And from the parking lot, from the post office, further over, it's about 700 feet. I misspoke yesterday. I told you it looked like about a quarter of a mile, but it wasn't quite that far. So you can see the debris path is very much in a straight line. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the aircraft itself. It's a Piper PA-31T. I'll be showing you some pictures of what we call an exemplar aircraft. Obviously, the accident aircraft is no longer. We've looked at the maintenance records. We're doing a very thorough review of them at this point. The last maintenance was performed on the aircraft on October 16th of this year, and the last flight on the airplane was December 18th, so not too long ago. It flew about 40 minutes from the Houston area back to Lafayette. This is an exemplar of the interior of the aircraft. The aircraft can handle between 6 and 8 occupants depending upon the seat configuration, and this is from the back wall of the aircraft looking forward towards the cockpit. This is the cockpit area itself. This is obviously, again, an exemplar. And we're going to spend a little bit of time here because this will help you to understand what the pilot was seeing prior to the crash. Obviously, we don't know what happened at this point. That will be part of the investigation. So the first part here is the primary flight display. This airplane has been upgraded since it was originally delivered, and a number of the instruments have been changed out. So they went from what we refer to as steam gauges to a glass cockpit. So that's where the yellow arrow is pointing. The next arrow, the blue arrow, is pointing to a annunciator panel. These are lights that will tell the condition of the aircraft, and likewise, the red arrow also shows annunciator lights. We are able to recover some of this, and whatever is usable will be sent back to our headquarters in Washington, D.C. for our laboratory to analyze. This is a picture from the crash site of the debris. You can see the outside bezel of the primary flight display. I'm not sure we're going to get much more of that. We'll look for it. However, the annunciator panel seems to be in reasonably good condition, so that will go back, and they can analyze the lights and the conditions of the lights, and that will help us to determine what the airplane was doing at the time. Going a little farther in, on the primary flight display, you can see here, this is what the pilot would have been looking at. This is an example of airspeed, about 115 knots. That might be a little bit slower than what the airplane was climbing at, but shortly after takeoff, that would have been the climb speed, and the pilot would have seen that directly in front of him. Over on the other side, the blue arrow shows the altitude, and the aircraft climbed, as we said yesterday, to an altitude of 900 feet. Seemed to be following the assigned departure path, which was 240 degrees. At the 900-foot level, the aircraft started a left turn and a descent. And when it descended through 700 feet, air traffic control got a low altitude warning, which it passed along to the pilot. There was no distress call from the aircraft that we know of at this time. These yellow triangles are what are known as command bars, and depending upon how the pilot had the airplane configured, the command bars will tell the pilot exactly what pitch attitude it should put the airplane into right after takeoff. So we'll drill into that just a little bit farther. So there you can see the command bars. We are in what would be level flight, and the command bars would be showing that we would be pointed directly at the horizon, the blue being the sky, the brown being obviously the ground. For a normal climb right after takeoff, the command bars would be somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees nose up. So what the pilot would do is to pitch the airplane up. This is level flight. Here are the command bars. This is the airplane symbol here. And on the far side there, you would see where the pilot would put the orange wedge into the yellow slot there. So pretty basic, very straightforward, and that's where you do your focus when you take off in low visibility. We are in preliminary stages, but we do have some areas of interest. We've identified the four corners of the aircraft. That's very important because it tells us that the airplane was in one piece when it made the first contact with the ground, so it did not come apart in midair. The flaps appear to be up. That would be a flight configuration as opposed to a landing configuration, so we think we've ascertained that. Yesterday, one of you asked about the landing gear position. We can't confirm from the wreckage that the gear was up or down. We do have a witness, however, that stated that the landing gear was in the up position. The avionics, as I mentioned, whatever we can recover will be sent back to our lab at NTSB and analyzed for whatever information we can glean from that. We got a few more witnesses yesterday as a result of the briefing, and so 6 identified so far. And again, if there are any more witnesses out there, we really would like them to contact us, witness@ntsb.gov. The weather, we reported that yesterday, was a 200-foot ceiling, overcast, 3/4 of a mile. That is flyable under most circumstances, and the tops were reported by an aircraft that took off just prior at 1,800 and no clouds above. The maintenance on the aircraft, we're looking at the records. The FAA has something called Airworthiness Directives, and this is similar to the recall on an automobile, and the FAA will put out either it's an emergency AD, which means it's got to be recalled immediately, or they will give you some time with which to comply in the next 100 flight hours or at the next annual inspection. We'll be looking very closely to see if the aircraft has complied with all ADs. The engines are in the process of being recovered and will be shipped back to the manufacturer, Pratt & Whitney, who is a party to the investigation, and the engines will be torn down at one of their facilities. They will be overseen by an NTSB power plant specialist to make sure that everything is done in accordance with our rules. From that, we'll be able to determine if the engines were at full power, if they were at partial power, asymmetrical power, which means that one engine was producing a lot of power, the other engine wasn't, or if there was no power at all. There's a natural tendency out there to speculate on the condition of all of this, and we make it very clear from our position, at this point in the investigation, we don't rule anything in or rule anything out. So I know, again, that people want to have an instant analysis. We don't do that. Obviously, the engines have to have fuel, the proper quantity. We understand that the aircraft was fueled after its previous flight. And the other thing that we'll look at is the quality of the fuel. Was the fuel contaminated in any way? We were unable to recover any fuel samples from the aircraft at this point. We will be checking the fuel farm where the fuel was purchased for the airplane to see if in fact there is any contamination, whether the filters were changed out as they were supposed to be, and the record keeping in accordance with good maintenance practice. The pilot is obviously a concern to us at this point. We know from what he reported on his last medical exam that he had 1,531 hours total flight time. At this point, we don't know how much flight time he had specifically in the Cheyenne II. He had his last medical certificate issued just last month in November of 2019, and that's where he reported his flight time. We will be looking for his logbooks, and hopefully that will give us a little more information. Currency. When you fly, you have to not only have the certificates, but you also have to be current to be able to carry passengers in a multi-engine aircraft in this case, and you also have to have instrument currency, and those will be things that we are looking at as well, and hopefully that will come from the logbooks. The aircraft loading. The aircraft had 6 people on board. We will be looking very closely at the weight and the balance of the aircraft. If the aircraft is overloaded, that affects the climb capability. It's not going to be able to climb as quickly as possible. We don't know exactly what the condition is at this point. The balance capability is very important because there's a certain center of gravity in which the airplane has to maintain. If the center of gravity is too far forward, the aircraft will not climb and pitch up very well. If it's too far aft, the airplane will be very unstable. So this is something else that we will be working on to get a clear picture of. Air traffic control, I've already mentioned the clearances that we have at this point and the communications. That will be gone over in greater detail. We will listen to the transcripts and see if there's anything more we can get. There was no cockpit voice recorder on board the aircraft, so unlike commercial aircraft, we will not be able to hear what was said in the cockpit. We do have an update from the radar from the FAA. It is consistent with what we reported to you yesterday, that the aircraft was on course up until about 900 feet and then started into a gradually tightening left turn, and that is also when it started to lose altitude. Preliminary report we'll have in about 1 to 2 weeks. This is Dr. Rohde's responsibility. And a factual report will be in approximately 12 months, depending upon what challenges we face along the way and how much information we can gather in the early stages. It takes as long as it takes to make sure that we get it right. The final report will be in 12 to 18 months, again, assuming that we get the information that we need. This will be our final on-scene briefing, but you will be able to get updates at the Twitter, located here on the screen, Twitter at NTSB_newsroom. I'll now take any questions that you have. Once again, raise your hand first. Identify who you are and your name. So, ma'am?
Natasha Chen, CNN. Do you know whether this pilot had flown this exact plane before, and also who owns this plane?
I can't speak specifically to that. I think that's one of the things that we are looking at. Dr. Rohde, do you have anything to add to that?
We know that the airplane was registered to and owned by a limited liability company, a corporation here locally, and the pilot had flown the airplane before, so what we will do is ascertain how much the pilot had flown before the accident.
On the December 18th flight, is that?
Yes.
Yeah, the time and type within a particular make and model is very helpful because airplanes are more different than cars, and so it's very useful to know how much time and type somebody has. Sir.
Sam Rock with NBC. The fact that you said that there were 4 corners that were found, which indicates that it was still in one piece connected to the ground. Would that seem to suggest that there was not any mechanical failure in the air, or you can't draw that connection?
So I think there's a question in there that the fact that we found the 4 corners possibly might indicate that there was no mechanical failure in the air. That starts to sound like an analysis situation, which we will not do. What the four corners tells us is that the airplane hit the ground intact. It doesn't tell us about anything else. Okay, so we cannot draw any further conclusions. Sir?
Yes, Flint's the Rankin Parish News. It's my understanding that Cheyenne 2 had an upgraded SAS stabilization system which was optional after production. Do you know if that has been installed in this plane? I know you mentioned earlier that the gauges and stuff have been upgraded. Do you know if the SAS system was on this particular plane?
I can't answer that question, Dr. Rohde. Do you have any insight on that?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Cassie Sherman, News 15 here in Lafayette. There were some witnesses that said the plane was circling around before it went down. Do you guys have a bunch of other people saying the same thing, or are you hearing the same thing?
So the question was the airplane circling around prior to impact? The radar indication is that the aircraft was in a descending left spiral, and the witnesses saw the airplane come out of the base of the clouds, which were very low, about 200 feet, in a fairly steep nose-down attitude, which then appeared to pitch up to close to level. So that was that. Yes, sir.
The video that you've recovered of the incident, is it surveillance video? Is it cell phone video? Can you just tell us factually what kind of video it is?
So the question is, what kind of video have we recovered up to this point? The video we mentioned yesterday was not particularly helpful. However, this morning we did get a very good video recovery. We're not able to show it to you at this point because we just got it this morning, but it gives us a very clear picture of what the airplane was doing as it came out of the clouds. So that will help us to understand what the witnesses saw or what they thought they saw.
Surveillance video?
It is surveillance video, yes. Sir.
The age of the aircraft of concern, is it typical to have a 40-year-old aircraft of this type flying around?
Is the age of the aircraft a concern? No, generally not. Airplanes, unlike cars, can have very long lives. The key point is, are they properly maintained? And so that's one of the things we are going to be looking at. If you have a 40-year-old airplane that is not well maintained, that's not a good thing. If you have a 40-year-old aircraft that is well maintained, there's no problem with that whatsoever. So.
You said you're interested in the pilot. Are you any more interested in this particular circumstance than you did at any time?
So the question is, are we interested in the pilot or more interested in the pilot? And the answer is no, we are interested in everything at this point. As I said, we are not ruling anything in or anything out. It's too early, and as I say, I've heard some speculation on some of the networks. Somebody is quite certain that he or she knows exactly what happened. We're not prepared to make that statement yet. And as someone who has speculated in the past in prior life, I can tell you it's very easy to make a mistake. Yes, ma'am.
Question about the engines. We're hearing that both engines possibly got a complete overhaul 5 weeks ago, and a witness is telling us that they heard no engine sound as the plane was going down. Can you speak to either of those things?
So the question is that the engines, well, a statement that the engines were overhauled about 5 weeks ago, and that there was a witness report that they heard no engine sound. Dr. Rohde, do you have any information there?
We have two very reliable witnesses immediately under the path where the airplane was flying. One of them with extensive aviation experience. That witness has reported to us that they heard high engine power or engine sounds just prior to the accident. Regarding the overhaul, I'm not aware of an overhaul within the last 5 weeks. So that is not in the maintenance records, but will continue to be a focus of our investigation as we move forward.
One of the challenges we face, and you bring it up here, is the eyewitness reports. And aviation is a technical business, and sometimes people think they saw or heard something, and of course it's a stressful situation, so what you see or what you thought you saw sometimes isn't factual. This is why it's so important for us to have the engines at the manufacturer's location and thoroughly torn down so we can see what's going on. There will be rotational scoring if the engines were running at the time, and the amount of internal damage to the engines will give us a pretty good idea of what the power is. So at this point, it's way too early to make that determination. Yes, sir?
Can you share any details from the October inspection? Anything at all from that?
I don't, the question is, can we share any details from the October inspection? I don't think we have anything yet at that point. As information comes out, we will release it, and there's something known as the docket, which will have all of this factual information as it comes out. And when that happens, we will publish that on our NTSB website, so you will know. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that the engines will be sent back to Pratt & Whitney with the NTSB overseeing that process. Can you describe what sort of condition those are in, given that you've also spoken to how charred the wreckage is and how damaged it is? What kind of condition are those engines?
So the question is about the engines being sent back to Pratt & Whitney with our oversight and what condition they are in. The engines will be sent back to Pratt & Whitney. Our people will be there to observe the teardown, and the engines are pretty significantly damaged. However, it is often our experience that despite heavy damage, there are well-known signatures of operation. And so both the manufacturer and our people are experts at determining what the engine was doing at the time. So we'll look forward to that, and as soon as we have something definitive, then we will let you know. Yes, ma'am.
Jordan, in talking with KTC, I know one of the areas of interest you all mentioned air traffic control, and you all said you wouldn't be able to retrieve conversations from the cockpit, but you all said you all are going to look at communication. What type of communication are you all looking at?
The question is, what kind of communication are we looking at from air traffic control? One of the things that makes our job a lot easier is that all air traffic control external to the airplane is recorded. So the FAA has the tapes of all conversations from the time that the pilot got his taxi clearance, his takeoff clearance, and then the final conversation, which really wasn't a conversation, it was just a low altitude alert. We'll be looking at all of that to see if there's anything else that we can pick up from that. There is, unfortunately, because they didn't key the microphone or anything like that, there's no background noise, there's nothing much. We just, in the instance of being thorough, want to be sure that we cover all bases. So we'll be looking at it again on first blush. We've told you what we know, but it will be thoroughly analyzed before we go any farther. The exact time of takeoff, the question was, Dr. Rohde?
About 9:20.
As far as we know, the airplane was airborne for just over a minute. So just long enough to get airborne, get up to 900 feet, and then start a descending left turn.
Was there any indication, Vice Chairman, that the pilot acknowledged the low altitude warning when that was issued?
The question is, did the pilot acknowledge the low altitude warning? At this point, we have no indications that there was any conversation back to air traffic control stating that. So, we'll take one more question, if anybody has one. Yes, sir?
When you're going over air traffic control, I know you didn't hear from the pilot, but were you able to hear any alarms in the cockpit over air traffic control warnings?
The question is, were we able to hear any alarms over the air traffic control frequency? We won't be able to hear any alarms unless the pilot keys the microphone to do that. And at this point, preliminary, at this point, we're not aware that the pilot keyed the microphone. They have a button typically on the one horn of the yoke, which literally all it requires you to do is press a button. But if that did not happen, there will be no audio other than the outbound audio from the controller. So thank you very much for being with us today. This is a very difficult situation for the families and for the community. We will continue to move forward. Dr. Rohde, do you have any further points?
I do have one request.
Please.
So we're requesting anybody in the community within half a mile to a mile radius of where the airplane crashed. If you have a Nest camera on your doorbell, on your house, on a tree that might have captured audio of the accident airplane, I don't need video, I need audio. So if you can hear the airplane flying prior to the crash, please reach out to our witness email address and let us know, and we will retrieve that recording from you. That will be beneficial for the investigation.
Thank you. Thank you.